They said it was a tragic accident, but a $200 million secret says otherwise. The sun had barely risen over Costa Rica, casting soft gold across the waves when the news broke. Malcolm Jamal Warner, the man whose smile had been a fixture in millions of living rooms, whose voice carried warmth like an old friend, was gone. No long battle with illness, no warning, just gone. They said it was an accident, a sudden drowning in waters Malcolm had swum in countless times before. The headlines called it tragic, but to those who truly knew him, the word didn't fit. Something felt off. Tributes began flooding in almost instantly. Fans posted grainy photos from meet and greets, recalling how he'd made them feel like they mattered. Co-stars struggled through interviews, their voices cracking as they spoke his name. Social media became a living memorial, each post soaked in grief. But in the middle of all that mourning, one silence stood out. It was louder than the headlines, sharper than the tears. It came from the one person everyone expected to speak first, his wife. In the hours after Malcolm's death, fans expected to hear from the one person who had shared his life most closely, his wife. A heartfelt post. A simple thank you to the millions mourning him. Even just a request for privacy. But there was nothing. No photos, no words, no presence at his memorial. She wasn't seen comforting Pamela. She wasn't spotted at family gatherings. She wasn't anywhere. It was as if she had stepped out of Malcolm's life the moment his heart stopped beating and erased every trace of their marriage along with her. For Pamela, the silence was deafening. While she stood in front of cameras, holding back tears, trying to make sense of the loss, his wife's absence was impossible to ignore. And then finally, the silence broke, but not from her. It came from Pamela herself, her voice shaking but her eyes steady as she looked into the flashing lights of the press and said 6 words that would change everything. "My son's death was not an accident." Weeks after Malcolm's death, Pamela received a phone call that froze her in place. It was from her son's longtime lawyer, a man she trusted. His voice was low, careful, almost as if he was afraid someone might overhear. He told her about something Malcolm had never mentioned to his family, a life insurance policy worth $200 million. Pamela's breath caught in her throat. The amount sounded unreal, the kind of number you only hear about in movies. But it was real, and it had one detail that made her blood run cold. The sole beneficiary was Malcolm's wife. Even worse, the payout had been processed within days of his death. No delays, no disputes. The money had been quietly moved into her personal account while the world was still grieving. Pamela's grief hardened into suspicion. She confronted her daughter-in-law, desperate for answers. But instead of an explanation, the conversation erupted into a storm of shouting and accusations. By the end, Pamela ordered her out of the family home, and she left without looking back. From that moment, Pamela stopped seeing herself as just a grieving mother. She became an investigator. Pamela began digging, and it didn't take long before the cracks started to show. Witness statements from the night Malcolm died didn't match the official report. Timelines had gaps large enough to hide the truth. Phone records revealed calls that were mysteriously deleted. The life insurance documents, the ones worth $200 million, were dated in ways that didn't make sense. And there were receipts, contracts, and travel records that painted a picture very different from the one the public had been told. The deeper Pamela went, the stranger it got. It was as if pieces of the puzzle had been deliberately removed, but every missing piece only made her more determined to find out why. She took everything she had to the FBI. What started as a family tragedy was now becoming a potential criminal investigation. And when word of the FBI's involvement leaked, the story exploded online. Social media split in two. Some saw Pamela as a warrior for justice, refusing to be silenced. Others accused her of letting grief twist her mind. But Pamela didn't care about opinions. She cared about the truth. And the truth, she believed, was hiding in plain sight. Then, out of nowhere, a new piece of evidence surfaced. A grainy, low-light clip from a security camera at a small dock in Costa Rica. No one knew who leaked it or why, but the footage was enough to send the internet into a frenzy. It showed Malcolm walking alone toward a boat, his stride calm, steady, until a second figure appeared in the background. The shadow moved quickly, almost too quickly, closing the gap behind him. And then, the footage cut off, abruptly. Within hours, the video was being slowed down, zoomed in, frame by frame analyzed by thousands of strangers online. Some swore they recognized the way that figure walked. Others argued it was impossible to tell. Pamela didn't hesitate. In her heart, she believed she knew exactly who it was, and if she was right, it meant her son's death was no accident at all. But the clip was only 8 seconds long, and those 8 seconds would tear this story wide open. Not long after the footage leaked, a new voice entered the story, a local fisherman who had been near the dock the night Malcolm died. At first, he kept quiet, afraid of getting involved, but as the headlines spread, so did his guilt. He told investigators he saw Malcolm on the dock, and he saw someone else there too. The two appeared to be arguing. He couldn't hear every word, only sharp, tense voices cutting through the night air. Then came the sound he would never forget, something heavy hitting the water. The fisherman insisted Malcolm didn't jump. He went in wrong, like someone had forced him. At the same time, investigators uncovered a different trail: money. In the days after Malcolm's death, large transfers began moving through offshore accounts. A luxury property appeared in another country under a shell company. High-end cars were purchased in cash, and every transaction traced back to the same person, his wife. Public opinion began to shift fast. The grieving widow was now being called something else entirely: the million-dollar widow. And Pamela knew they were only scratching the surface. As the FBI pieced together the timeline, one detail stood out like a flashing red light. The life insurance policy hadn't existed for most of Malcolm's career. It was brand new, signed and finalized just 18 months before his death. And here's what set off alarms: the monthly premiums weren't paid from Malcolm's account. They were paid entirely by his wife. On paper, it could be framed as love, a spouse protecting their partner's future. But in the shadow of everything else, it looked far more calculated. Friends began speaking off the record. They recalled tension between the couple, arguments over money, long separations, and whispers about trust issues. Some remembered Malcolm's voice sounding distracted or weighed down in recent months. Others said he'd been traveling more, spending more time away from home. Then came the leak that made Pamela's chest tighten. Reports that Malcolm's wife had left Costa Rica less than 48 hours after his death. Not only that, but security footage placed her at a bank in another city the very next day. The FBI wasn't ready to make their move yet, but Pamela could feel it. They were closing in. And when they did, she was ready to hear exactly what happened on that dock. The call came on a gray morning. Pamela's phone buzzed, and on the other end was an FBI agent. His tone was steady, but every word carried weight. They had found something big enough to move the case from suspicion to full-blown criminal charges. Hours later, the announcement hit every news network at once. The FBI had officially ruled Malcolm Jamal Warner's death a homicide, and the prime suspect was his wife. The details were staggering. Surveillance footage from the dock showed her arriving just minutes before Malcolm walked toward the water. Audio picked up fragments of their voices, sharp, heated words about money and freedom. Then, in a moment frozen forever on that grainy video, there was a shove. Not a stumble, not an accident, a deliberate push. Investigators said she made no move to help, no call for aid. Within 2 minutes, she walked away from the dock completely. Then came the financial records, transfers to offshore accounts, property purchases under aliases, all from the $200 million life insurance payout. To Pamela, the coldness in her daughter-in-law's actions now made sense. She hadn't been grieving. She'd been preparing to disappear, and disappear she did. By the time the arrest warrant was issued, she was already gone, last seen boarding a private jet, heading toward a country with no extradition treaty. The hunt was on. Pamela refused to wait quietly for the system to work. While the FBI chased leads, she launched her own crusade. She hired private investigators to track the woman the world now called the million-dollar widow. She went on national and international media, making sure her son's name never slipped out of the headlines. Then an email surfaced, leaked from an anonymous source. It was from Malcolm to a close friend, written just 2 weeks before his death. The words sent chills through everyone who read them. Something feels wrong. I can't explain it yet, but if anything ever happens to me, promise me you'll talk to my mom. That single sentence transformed the case. Vigils were held in cities around the world. Hashtags exploded across social media. Malcolm's face appeared on posters, murals, and news tickers. What started as a mother's fight became a movement, uniting strangers in the pursuit of justice. And then came the tip, a report from Eastern Europe of a woman living in a heavily guarded luxury villa who looked exactly like the fugitive. The FBI wouldn't confirm or deny it, but Pamela didn't need official word. In her gut, she knew. The chase wasn't over, and neither was the fight. The dock in Costa Rica has become more than just the place where Malcolm's life ended. It's now a memorial, a place where fans from across the world leave flowers, candles, and handwritten letters. Some say they feel his presence in the ocean breeze. Others stand in silence, still unable to believe that someone so full of life could be taken so suddenly. Pamela visits once a year. She stands at the edge, staring into the endless blue, telling her son about the progress in the case, about the strangers who fight for him, about the love that hasn't faded one bit. And then she turns away, because she knows she can't stand there forever, not while the woman who took him is still free. This story is no longer just about Malcolm. It's a reminder that behind every headline is a real family, real heartbreak, and sometimes a truth so dark it refuses to stay buried. Somewhere out there, a woman is running, and somewhere else, a mother is chasing her, armed not with weapons, but with the truth. If you've made it this far, you know this isn't just another celebrity tragedy. It's a $200 million secret someone thought would disappear in the waves, but it hasn't. And it won't. Not while Pamela is still breathing. Every share, every comment, every post pushes Malcolm's story further into the light and out of the shadows where the guilty hide. Pamela can't do this alone. She needs an army. She needs us. So share his name. Share his smile. Make sure that when the person responsible looks at the world, all they see is Malcolm's face staring back at them. A face they will never escape. Because justice for Malcolm isn't just a hope, it's a fight. And it's one we finish together.